Grand Loop Road, Yellowstone, a disturbing true crime story. Grand Loop Road cuts through Yellowstone like a promise, pavement instead of dirt, guardrails instead of cliffs, signs, maps, mile markers, and the quiet assurance that if something goes wrong, help is never far away. People trust roads because roads imply order. They suggest oversight. They make wilderness feel managed, observed, and contained. You can be surrounded by miles of forest and still feel safe as long as you're on asphalt. That belief is powerful. It lowers attention. It encourages routine decisions. It convinces people that danger belongs off the road, deeper in the trees, somewhere unmarked. Grand Loop Road reinforces that illusion perfectly. It is scenic, wide, and familiar. Traffic comes and goes. Wildlife crosses openly. Tourists slow down for photos. Nothing about it feels hidden, but roads do something subtle. They compress distance while expanding opportunity. They move people quickly through places that would otherwise resist access. They create predictable behavior. And when traffic thins, when daylight fades, when sound drops away, they become corridors of isolation disguised as safety. This story is not about getting lost in Yellowstone. It is not about a remote campsite or an off-trail hike. It is about how a real crime unfolded in a place people believed was protected simply because it was paved. A crime where the absence of witnesses mattered more than the presence of wilderness. A crime where silence did not just surround what happened, but actively shaped it. What makes this case disturbing is not what is known, but how much certainty collapses once the road is examined closely. Timelines bend. Ordinary decisions gain weight. Evidence appears incomplete, not because it was destroyed, but because the environment absorbed it. And through it all, Grand Loop Road remains open, unchanged, continuing to invite trust. This is a true crime story that does not announce itself with violence or chaos. It unfolds quietly through gaps, through things that should have been noticed and were not. And once those gaps appear, they never fully close. Grand Loop Road feels safe because it looks intentional. It is designed to guide, to regulate, to reassure. Unlike trails, it does not suggest risk. It suggests transit. You are not supposed to linger on it long enough to feel exposed. You pass through, observe, move on. That rhythm creates confidence, and confidence creates predictability. People behave differently on roads than they do in the backcountry. Windows stay up, doors unlock without thought, stops feel casual, attention narrows to the immediate path ahead. The mind assumes presence of others, even when none are visible. That assumption is rarely questioned, especially in a national park where rules and rangers imply oversight. Grand Loop Road amplifies this effect because of how it presents itself. Long sightlines, gentle curves, scenic pullouts that feel curated rather than improvised. Everything about it suggests that nothing unexpected should happen there. That belief is shared, reinforced, and rarely challenged. But trust is not protection. It is a condition, and conditions can be exploited. What most people don't notice is how quickly the road can empty, how traffic thins in waves rather than gradually, how stretches of pavement exist where sound travels strangely and visibility collapses faster than expected, how cell service fades without warning, how darkness settles unevenly, leaving pockets of shadow that feel deeper than they should. The road does not warn you when it transitions from public space to blind spot. There is no sign that marks the shift, no indication that behavior should change. That is what makes it effective. People continue to act as if they are observed when they are not. They continue to trust the structure even when the structure no longer offers coverage. This is where opportunity emerges, not because the road is hidden, but because it is assumed to be visible. Not because it is remote, but because it feels supervised even when it isn't. Grand Loop Road lowers defenses without asking permission. And once that trust is established, it becomes difficult to recognize when it no longer applies. Grand Loop Road feels safe because it was built to feel safe. Everything about it communicates order. The pavement is smooth, the curves are calculated, the guardrails are placed where danger might otherwise intrude. There are signs that tell you where you are and what to expect next. Mile markers quietly reassure you that this space is measured, monitored, and understood. Roads like this do not feel wild, they feel managed. That sense of management changes how people think and behave. On a road, especially inside a national park, vigilance relaxes. You assume that someone has passed recently or will pass soon. You assume that if something went wrong, it would be noticed. You assume that danger belongs somewhere else off the road, deeper into the trees, far from asphalt and painted lines. Those assumptions feel reasonable. They are also the foundation of vulnerability. Grand Loop Road encourages motion rather than presence. You are not meant to stop for long unless the scenery invites you to. Pullouts are framed as moments of beauty, not exposure. Even when traffic is light, the design suggests continuity, a sense that this road is part of a system that does not pause or forget. That belief fills the silence when no other cars are visible. It replaces observation with expectation. But roads do not watch. They do not remember. They only carry. What most people never notice is how quickly the character of the road can change without physically changing at all. Traffic does not thin evenly. It disappears in pockets. There are stretches where minutes pass without another vehicle. Then suddenly several appear close together. That uneven rhythm creates long windows where nothing moves through at all. In those windows, the road becomes something else, not abandoned, but unattended. Sound behaves differently there. Wind moves through open valleys and tree lines in ways that carry noise away instead of toward it. Engines fade faster than expected. Voices do not travel the way they should. Even wildlife crossings can feel muted, as if the environment absorbs rather than reflects activity. The quiet is not total, it is selective. Light follows the same pattern. Sunset does not fall uniformly along the road. Some stretches lose visibility early, as hills and forest edges block the last light. Others remain exposed longer, creating stark contrast. Shadows stretch across pavement at odd angles. What was visible moments ago becomes uncertain without warning. Headlights help, but they also narrow perception, forcing attention forward while everything else dissolves into darkness. Cell service mirrors this instability. It exists, then it doesn't. There is rarely a clear boundary. Bars disappear mid-curve, mid-thought, mid-decision. The assumption that communication is available lingers even after the signal is gone. That delay between loss and awareness matters. Trust persists longer than conditions justify. Grand Loop Road becomes most dangerous not when it is empty, but when it is assumed to be occupied. People behave as if witnesses are nearby, even when there are none. They stop casually. They make choices they would not make in a truly isolated place. They underestimate how quickly help becomes theoretical rather than real. This is what turns the road into a blind spot. Not concealment, but confidence. Not darkness, but assumption. The belief that visibility exists even when it does not. That belief lowers defenses more effectively than isolation ever could. The road does not need to hide a crime. It only needs to host one during the moments when trust outlasts reality, when structure remains but oversight is gone, when behavior stays relaxed because nothing has signaled that it should change. Grand Loop Road is not dangerous because it is remote. It is dangerous because it feels known. And once that feeling takes hold, it becomes very difficult to recognize when the protection you think you have is no longer there. The reason they were on Grand Loop Road that day was unremarkable in every way that matters. There was no urgency, no secrecy, no deviation from routine that would have raised concern at the time. It was a practical decision, the kind people make without thinking, because it aligns with expectations. A drive to reach a destination. A scenic route chosen because it was familiar. A stretch of road that felt safer than alternatives, simply because it was paved and marked. That ordinariness is what allowed everything else to unfold unnoticed. Nothing about the plan suggested risk. The timing made sense. The route was logical. The choice of Grand Loop Road felt efficient, even comforting. It was the main artery through the park, the place where people assumed visibility and movement would exist, even if they did not see it directly. There was no reason to believe that choosing this road could place someone in danger. That assumption shaped every decision that followed. People do not prepare for harm when they believe they are making the safest possible choice. They do not mark time carefully. They do not alert others unnecessarily. They do not treat brief stops as moments of exposure. Familiarity compresses caution. The more ordinary the decision, the less attention it receives. This is where true crime becomes uncomfortable, because the actions that precede it are so easy to recognize. There is no warning sign embedded in the choice itself. Anyone could have made the same decision on the same day for the same reason. That is what makes it relatable, and that relatability is what makes it frightening. The road promised efficiency. It promised continuity. It suggested that nothing unexpected would happen because nothing ever had before. Grand Loop Road did not feel like a place where people disappeared or where violence could occur without interruption. It felt like infrastructure, like a connector rather than a destination. That belief removed friction from decision-making. Stops felt temporary, pauses felt harmless, time felt flexible. There was no sense of urgency because there was no reason for one. The idea that something could go wrong did not need to be actively dismissed. It simply never arose. What is most disturbing in hindsight is how reasonable every choice appears even now. There is no obvious mistake to point to, no reckless behavior to condemn, no moment where a different decision would clearly have changed the outcome. The path that led to danger is indistinguishable from the path that leads to safety, until it is too late to separate them. True crime often invites the illusion that tragedy results from error, that if someone had chosen differently, the outcome would have changed. This case resists that comfort. The decision to be on Grand Loop Road was not flawed. It was expected. It was what most people would have done without hesitation. That is what allowed opportunity to exist. The road did not demand attention because nothing about it seemed to require vigilance. It carried people through Yellowstone every day without incident. It did not ask for heightened awareness. It rewarded trust with efficiency. That trust lingered even as conditions subtly shifted. By the time anything felt wrong, the decision that placed them there was long past. There was no clear point of reversal, no moment where risk became obvious enough to counterbalance familiarity. The ordinary reason that put them on that road remained ordinary, right up until the moment it no longer mattered. That is how real crime embeds itself in routine. Not through dramatic deviation, but through seamless alignment with expectations. The most dangerous situations are often the ones that feel least deserving of scrutiny, and once that alignment is complete, it becomes almost impossible to recognize the moment when the ordinary turns irreversible. The first indication that something was wrong did not arrive as fear. It arrived as confusion, a moment that felt slightly out of place but not alarming enough to demand attention. At the time, it registered as an inconvenience, a minor irregularity that could be explained later if it needed to be. Most people would not have remembered it at all if nothing else had followed. This is where the timeline begins to lose its shape. There is a point in every unresolved case where events stop lining up cleanly, not dramatically, quietly. A time that should be fixed becomes approximate. A movement that should be accounted for becomes inferred. A gap appears that seems too small to matter. Those gaps are where certainty dissolves. On Grand Loop Road, time behaves differently than people expect. Distances are deceptive. Driving feels slower than it is because the scenery demands attention, yet minutes disappear without notice. Stops feel brief even when they are not. Without landmarks that mark progress clearly, memory fills in details rather than recording them precisely. The first inconsistency emerged around timing, a delay that could not be measured accurately, a pause that felt shorter than it was, a moment when expectation did not match reality, but the difference was small enough to ignore. No alarm was triggered because nothing had technically gone wrong yet. That delay mattered. Once time becomes elastic, everything else depends on assumption. Witnesses estimate rather than recall. Devices record without context. Movements are reconstructed based on what should have happened, not what can be proven. The narrative becomes built on probability rather than fact. Another inconsistency followed, subtle but more troubling. A location that should have been passed already, a direction that did not align with intention. A detail that felt correct in isolation, but incorrect when placed against the larger sequence. These moments did not contradict each other outright. They simply failed to reinforce one another. At the time, none of this raised concern. People do not question small disruptions in routine unless they accumulate. The mind smooths them over, creating continuity where there is none. That smoothing process is automatic. It is how people function in complex environments without becoming overwhelmed. But once the story is told backward, once investigators attempt to reconstruct events, those smoothed edges become fractures. What makes this stage disturbing is that nothing decisive has occurred yet. There is no crime scene, no disappearance, no moment of violence, just a growing inability to say with confidence what happened when. The story still feels recoverable. Answers still seem possible. That belief is important because it delays response. When time slips quietly, urgency does not follow. People do not rush to intervene. Searches do not begin immediately. Decisions that might have altered outcomes are postponed because nothing appears urgent enough to justify them. The system waits for clarity that never arrives. Grand Loop Road contributes to this confusion by offering too many plausible explanations. Traffic patterns vary, wildlife causes delays, scenic stops interrupt flow, environmental conditions change rapidly. Any single inconsistency can be dismissed as normal. Together, they form something else entirely. The most unsettling realization is that this was likely the last moment when intervention could have mattered. When a question asked sooner might have changed the course of events. When uncertainty was still small enough to challenge, instead the timeline continued forward with gaps quietly embedded inside it. Later, when those gaps became impossible to ignore, they could not be closed. No amount of investigation could recover moments that were never clearly recorded. Memory had already rewritten itself around assumption. Evidence had already been absorbed by distance, darkness, and delay. The moment the timeline started to slip did not announce itself. It did not demand attention. It passed unnoticed, disguised as routine. And once time lost its anchor, everything that followed became harder to hold in place. Grand Loop Road did not become dangerous because it was hidden. It became dangerous because it was assumed to be visible. That distinction matters. Most people imagine blind spots as places that are remote, obstructed, or deliberately concealed. Grand Loop Road is none of those things. It is wide, scenic, and designed to be seen. That is exactly why it works as a blind spot when conditions align. The road moves through Yellowstone in a way that fragments observation. Traffic flows in clusters rather than continuously. Long stretches remain empty, then fill briefly, then empty again. During those gaps, the road exists without witnesses, even though it looks like a place that should always be observed. That contradiction creates opportunity. Visibility on Grand Loop Road is deceptive. Sightlines appear long and open during the day, but they collapse rapidly as light fades. Curves hide more than they reveal. Elevation changes block angles of view. Trees absorb sound. Valleys redirect it. You can be close to another vehicle or person and remain unaware of them, especially when attention is forward-focused and assumptions fill in what is not actively perceived. Pullouts contribute to this illusion. They are designed for brief stops, moments of admiration, not vulnerability. People exit vehicles casually, believing they are still part of a public space. They assume passing traffic will notice them. They assume isolation is temporary. What they do not realize is how quickly those assumptions expire when traffic pauses and sound disappears. At night, Grand Loop Road becomes something else entirely. Darkness does not fall evenly. Some sections lose visibility early, others remain partially lit by sky glow or reflection. This creates pockets of near-total obscurity adjacent to open pavement. Movement within those pockets can go unseen even from short distances. Headlights do not reveal them. They sharpen contrast instead, making what lies beyond the beam harder to interpret. The environment assists in this concealment without intent. Wind carries sound away from the road. Wildlife noise masks human movement. The smell of sulfur and pine blends into exhaust and cold air, making it difficult to distinguish presence through scent. Everything about the setting reduces the likelihood that unusual activity will register as such. This is where the road becomes a perfect blind spot, not because it hides activity, but because it normalizes it. A stopped vehicle does not immediately signal danger. A person standing near the road does not appear suspicious. Delays feel explainable. Silence feels temporary. The road teaches people to expect continuity, even when there is none. Investigators later face the consequences of this design. Witnesses pass through without noticing anything wrong. Others remember seeing something but cannot place it in time. Vehicles appear and disappear without record. The road offers too many explanations for why no one noticed what mattered. What makes this especially disturbing is that Grand Loop Road does not feel isolated enough to demand caution. People do not behave as if they are alone even when they are. They trust the structure instead of their senses. They assume observation exists simply because it should. That assumption is what creates the blind spot. It is psychological rather than physical. It exists in the space between what is visible and what is actually seen, between presence and awareness, between safety and oversight. Once something happens within that gap, it becomes extraordinarily difficult to reconstruct. The road does not preserve evidence. It erases it through normal use. Tires pass, weather shifts, wildlife moves through. What might have been noticed in a truly isolated place dissolves into routine here. Grand Loop Road does not announce when it stops being public space and starts becoming empty space. There is no warning, no transition, no signal to adjust behavior. That absence of boundary is what makes it effective. And by the time anyone realizes that the road was not being watched, whatever happened there is already part of the silence it creates. What investigators found was less disturbing than what they didn't. The absence stood out immediately, not because it suggested cleanliness or planning, but because it resisted interpretation. There were no signs of struggle, no damage, no scattered belongings, nothing that clearly indicated violence, panic, or flight. In most cases, that would be reassuring. Here it became the central problem. The scene did not behave the way a crime scene usually does. Objects were present, but they felt misplaced in meaning rather than location. A vehicle where one should not have been left. Personal items that suggested interruption without urgency. Doors that were not forced. Windows intact. Everything looked ordinary enough to discourage alarm, yet wrong enough to prevent comfort. What should have pointed clearly in one direction pointed nowhere instead. Investigators rely on disruption. Something broken, something moved, something that interrupts normal order. On Grand Loop Road, normal order absorbed the event rather than reflecting it. The environment did not resist what happened. It continued operating as designed. Cars passed, weather shifted, wildlife moved through. Each hour that followed diluted whatever traces might have existed. The absence of defensive marks raised questions, but none that could be answered definitively. Was there compliance, or was there no opportunity for resistance? Was there deception, or was there trust? Without evidence of urgency, it became impossible to determine whether the event unfolded quickly or gradually. Time itself became ambiguous. Even the lack of witnesses complicated interpretation. People had been on the road before and after the estimated window. That should have helped. Instead, it fractured the timeline further. No one noticed anything worth reporting because nothing appeared out of place. A stopped car did not look like danger. A person standing near a pullout did not register as unusual. The absence of alarm became self-reinforcing. In true crime, missing evidence often suggests intent. Here it suggested compatibility. Whatever occurred did not clash with the environment. It blended into it. That blending stripped the scene of narrative force. There was no single moment investigators could point to and say, this is where everything changed. The absence also altered how theories formed. Without physical struggle, explanations drifted toward accident or voluntary action. But those explanations collapsed under scrutiny. They required assumptions that contradicted known behavior. They demanded leaps that felt forced. Each attempt to explain the lack of evidence created new inconsistencies. What remained was a hollow center where clarity should have been. The case revolved around what could not be proven rather than what could. Investigators were forced to build outward from nothing, relying on inference instead of anchors. That made the entire structure fragile. The most unsettling part was how the absence persisted. Searches did not reveal what was missing because no one could agree on what should have been there in the first place. Without a clear starting point, every search expanded uncertainty instead of reducing it. Grand Loop Road did not offer resistance to what happened. It did not mark it, frame it, or preserve it. It allowed it to occur without disruption and then carried on. That is why the absence mattered more than evidence ever could. It wasn't a gap waiting to be filled. It was the shape of the crime itself. Silence on Grand Loop Road is not empty. It is active. It shapes perception, delays reaction, and absorbs consequence. What happened there was not simply hidden by quiet. It was enabled by it. The lack of sound did more than mask movement. It altered how people interpreted what they were experiencing in real time. Silence encourages assumption. When nothing is heard, the mind fills the gap with expectation. Someone else will notice. Another car will pass. Whatever seems slightly off will correct itself. On Grand Loop Road, that assumption persists longer than it should because the environment looks open and accessible even when it is not. The quiet also delays urgency. Without noise, without visible disruption, nothing signals that intervention is required. There is no alarm to respond to, no chaos demanding attention. Silence keeps everything in a state of plausibility. It allows unusual moments to remain explainable just long enough for them to pass without challenge. This is where silence becomes part of the crime. Not as a backdrop, but as a mechanism. The road absorbs sound unevenly. Wind carries it away. Trees break it apart. Elevation changes redirect it. A voice does not travel the way people expect it to. A movement that would draw attention elsewhere disappears here. Even mechanical sounds fade faster than logic suggests. By the time something registers as unusual, it is already gone. Silence also shapes memory. People recall what they noticed, not what they missed. When nothing interrupts routine, the absence of memory feels normal rather than suspicious. Witnesses pass through without registering details because there was nothing demanding registration. Later, when those details become important, they no longer exist to be retrieved. The delay compounds itself. Without immediate recognition, response slows. Searches begin later than they should. Evidence degrades. The environment continues functioning. Time moves forward without pause. Silence protects not by hiding activity, but by preventing it from being marked as significant. This is not the dramatic silence of danger. It is the ordinary silence of expectation. The kind that reassures rather than alarms. The kind that convinces people nothing requires action yet. That silence is far more effective than noise would ever be. When investigators arrive, they encounter the aftermath of that delay. The scene is quiet not because nothing happened, but because whatever happened did not disturb the surface. The silence they face is the same silence that allowed the crime to unfold without resistance. Grand Loop Road does not amplify violence, it neutralizes it. It strips events of urgency by surrounding them with normalcy. That normalcy becomes a shield, not against discovery, but against interruption. By the time silence is recognized as meaningful, it is too late to reverse its effects. The moment for clarity has passed. What remains is a case shaped not by what was seen or heard, but by what was allowed to go unnoticed. Silence did not merely follow the crime, it participated in it. And once it settled back into the landscape, it carried no trace of what it had concealed. The investigation never found solid ground. Every step forward rested on something unstable, something that shifted the moment it was examined closely. Facts existed, but they refused to align. Witness statements overlapped without reinforcing one another. Timelines bent instead of narrowing. What should have become clearer with effort became more diffuse. Investigators are trained to anchor a case early, a fixed point, a confirmed last sighting, a precise window where everything changes. On Grand Loop Road, that anchor never held. Each attempt to set it exposed another inconsistency, a sighting that could not be timed accurately, a vehicle that appeared in one account and vanished in another, a gap too wide to ignore but too narrow to define. The environment complicated everything without appearing hostile. Weather shifted in ways that altered conditions subtly but constantly. Wind erased tracks before they could be evaluated. Temperature changes affected estimates of time and movement. Wildlife activity blurred distinctions between human and environmental disturbance. Nothing dramatic enough to explain the confusion, yet enough to sustain it. Technology offered little relief. Devices recorded fragments without context. Data points existed, but resisted sequence. A signal here, a silence there. Digital traces that suggested presence without proving intent. The tools meant to provide certainty, instead multiplied interpretations. As theories formed, they collapsed under their own weight. Each one explained part of the story convincingly, then failed at a critical junction. A timeline that worked until it didn't. A motive that felt plausible until it conflicted with behavior. An explanation that accounted for absence, but not opportunity. Every near solution revealed a flaw that could not be ignored. This instability wore down momentum. Leads could not be prioritized because none were strong enough to dominate. Investigators were forced to spread attention thinly across possibilities that refused to resolve into probability. Resources were expended without convergence. The case expanded outward instead of closing inward. What made this especially frustrating was the lack of contradiction. Nothing directly disproved any theory. They simply could not coexist cleanly. Each demanded assumptions that weakened another. The case became a series of partial truths rather than a coherent narrative. Time did what the investigation could not. It softened urgency. Public attention drifted. The road returned to routine use. New incidents elsewhere drew focus. The unresolved nature of the case did not escalate pressure. It diluted it. Without new evidence, the gaps became familiar rather than alarming. The investigation did not fail in a dramatic sense. It stalled. It lost traction. It became a file that could be revisited, but not advanced. The lack of resolution did not come from neglect or incompetence. It came from the environment's ability to resist structure. Grand Loop Road did not give investigators nothing. It gave them too much uncertainty, too many ways to interpret the same fragments, too many variables that could not be isolated. The case remained technically open, but functionally unanchored. That is the most unsettling outcome. Not that the truth was hidden, but that it could not be stabilized long enough to be handled. The investigation never reached a point where answers were clearly absent. It remained suspended in the space between possibility and proof. And as long as that suspension holds, the case does not end. It simply waits unchanged on a road that continues to move people past the place where certainty disappeared. Type 1 to write the next topic, or type the changes you want. Once, there was one explanation that came closer than the rest. It accounted for most of the known facts without stretching logic too far. It fit the environment, the timing, the absence of struggle, and the way the event dissolved into routine without triggering alarm. For a brief moment, it offered the illusion of resolution. That theory suggested intent without spectacle, an interaction that unfolded calmly, a moment where trust, assumption, or compliance bridged the gap between safety and disappearance. It did not require violence in the traditional sense. It relied on timing, positioning, and the confidence that the road itself would do the rest. What made this explanation persuasive was how little it demanded. No dramatic confrontation, no witnesses reacting, no evidence that needed to be erased aggressively. Just an understanding of how Grand Loop Road behaves when traffic thins and attention relaxes, how people respond to perceived authority, familiarity, or routine interruption, how quickly uncertainty can be smoothed over when nothing looks wrong. For investigators, this theory explained why no one noticed anything immediately, why a stopped vehicle did not draw concern, why a brief interaction could occur without leaving marks, why silence did not trigger urgency. It aligned disturbingly well with the environment's capacity to normalize disruption. But then came the detail that broke it, a single inconsistency. Small on its own, but immovable. Something that should have happened if the theory were correct but didn't. Or something that did happen that the theory could not account for without introducing assumptions that weakened it entirely. That detail refused to fit, no matter how the narrative was adjusted. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sensational. It was the kind of fact that gets overlooked because it lacks emotional weight. But in true crime, those are often the most important. They are the details that resist storytelling, the ones that prevent closure not by contradiction, but by quiet refusal. Once that inconsistency was acknowledged, the theory unraveled. Not explosively, but structurally. Each attempt to patch the gap created a new one elsewhere. The explanation stopped feeling cohesive. It began to feel selective, convenient. The closer it came to certainty, the more fragile it became. This is where frustration sets in, not because there are no answers, but because the answers almost exist. The mind keeps returning to that theory because it explains so much. It feels responsible. It feels grounded. It feels like the truth should be nearby. But truth is not proximity. It is coherence. What remains unsettling is how easily the theory could have been accepted if that single detail had not surfaced. How close the case came to resolution without actually reaching it. How tempting it is to ignore what doesn't fit in order to quiet what does. Grand Loop Road encourages that temptation. It smooths over irregularities. It makes incomplete explanations feel sufficient. It rewards narratives that restore order, even if they are flawed. The theory that almost explained everything did not fail because it was unreasonable. It failed because reality refused to conform to it completely. That refusal is what keeps the case alive. As long as that inconsistency remains unresolved, every explanation remains provisional. The crime cannot be contained within a single narrative. It spills beyond the edges of logic, not because it is unknowable, but because it does not behave the way crimes are expected to. And that is what makes this case linger. Not the absence of theories, but the presence of one that came close enough to feel dangerous. Grand Loop Road never paused for what happened there. It did not change course, it did not close. It did not mark the place with anything that suggested loss or disruption. Traffic returned to its familiar rhythm. Tour buses rolled through. Families slowed for wildlife. The road resumed its role as a scenic corridor, and in doing so, it absorbed the crime into its routine. That continuation is part of what makes the case difficult to hold on to emotionally. Crimes are expected to alter spaces, to stain them, to leave some visible trace that demands acknowledgement. Grand Loop Road did the opposite. It returned to normal so completely that normality itself became unsettling. People drove past the location without knowing what had occurred there. They stood at pullouts nearby, taking photographs, unaware that uncertainty still hung over the pavement beneath their feet. Nothing signaled that this stretch of road held unanswered questions. Nothing asked for reflection. The absence of disruption allowed the event to recede from public awareness without ever being resolved. For those connected to the case, this was its own kind of aftermath. There was no physical place to point to and say, "This is where everything changed." The road did not isolate the event. It diluted it. The crime became harder to imagine as time passed because the setting refused to acknowledge it. This continuity also shaped how memory behaved. Without a closed scene, recollections lost urgency. The location blended back into familiarity. What once felt significant began to feel abstract. The mind struggled to reconcile the gravity of the event with the ordinary behavior of the environment that followed. The road's indifference did not mean the crime had no impact. It meant the impact had no visible outlet. It existed without expression. That made it easier for others to move on, but harder for the questions to settle. Unresolved events rely on reminders to stay present. Grand Loop Road offered none. Even investigators were affected by this persistence of normalcy. Revisiting the site did not trigger new insight. Each return felt less connected to the original moment. The environment provided no cues to anchor analysis. It was as if the road had erased its own memory. What remained was a case that existed almost entirely on paper and in thought. The physical world offered nothing to reinforce its reality. That disconnect weakened public attention and diluted pressure for resolution. The crime did not disappear, but it became background noise. This is one of the quiet horrors of unresolved cases in open spaces. The world continues without acknowledging what it absorbed. There is no barrier between tragedy and routine. They coexist without friction. Grand Loop Road's ability to carry on did not provide comfort. It provided erasure, not of facts, but of context. The place where certainty was lost became indistinguishable from every other mile of pavement. That sameness made the absence harder to confront. The road did not need to hide the crime. It only needed to keep moving. And in doing so, it ensured that what happened there would always feel slightly unreal, slightly out of reach, suspended between memory and motion. What this case ultimately exposes is not a flaw in investigation or a failure of vigilance, but a deeper misunderstanding of what safety means in open, managed spaces. Grand Loop Road was never designed to prevent harm. It was designed to move people efficiently and make wilderness feel accessible. That design does something subtle to the human mind. It replaces awareness with expectation. It convinces people that danger requires isolation, darkness, or concealment, when in reality it often relies on familiarity and routine. The crime did not happen despite the road. It happened because of it. Grand Loop Road created the conditions where normal behavior could continue uninterrupted while something abnormal took place. It offered structure without supervision, visibility without observation, and access without accountability. The environment did not resist what happened. It accommodated it. That accommodation is what makes the case so unsettling. In places that feel obviously dangerous, people adjust. They watch more closely. They mark time. They prepare for uncertainty. On Grand Loop Road, none of that happens because the setting discourages it. The space feels regulated enough to relax defenses, but isolated enough to erase consequence. That combination is rare, and it is precisely what made this crime possible. What lingers is not fear of Yellowstone, but discomfort with how easily trust can be misplaced. The road taught people to believe that presence equals protection, that if something were wrong, someone would notice. That belief was never tested until it failed completely. This case resists closure because it does not fit the stories people tell themselves about crime. There was no dramatic confrontation, no visible violence, no clear moment of rupture, just a sequence of ordinary decisions unfolding in an environment that quietly withdrew oversight at the exact moment it mattered. The unanswered questions are not limited to who was responsible or why it happened. They extend to how many similar opportunities exist in places designed to feel safe. How often routine masks vulnerability. How many moments pass unnoticed because nothing appears wrong on the surface. Grand Loop Road continues to function exactly as intended. That is what makes this case endure. The conditions that allowed it to happen have not changed. The road still lowers attention. It still encourages trust. It still creates blind spots without signaling them. The most disturbing realization is not that a crime occurred there, but that nothing about the place prevented it from happening again. The landscape learned nothing. The structure did not adapt. The road absorbed the event and returned to normal. In that sense, the crime never truly ended. It remains unresolved not only because answers are missing, but because the environment that shaped it remains intact. The question is no longer just what happened on Grand Loop Road. The question is how many times a place like this can be trusted before trust itself becomes the most dangerous assumption of all.